This room has 6 perspectives. For our office, the perspective has been, in a way, extremely important. And we call it perspective even though that, in a way, it's made on the computer. It's, in a way, made by hand on the computer, so it is quite ambiguous. But it's composed like you would compose a perspective. It's not the result of a rendering program. And of course, it has, I guess, a couple of obvious references, which were also important for us. But it has always been for us also something like, you could say, economy of means. Like how can you make the most clear depiction of an architectural project, of an idea, with very simple tools.
Yeah, it's important to, we also call them collages. And of course they, in that sense, refer to older examples when things were really still glued on paper, but we make them similarly on the computer. But the actual constraint, let's say, of putting layers on top of each other and composing an image together like this, the constraint of choosing also one perspective is very important in our work, but also in architecture and even architectural history. And for that reason, we chose from the archive work of Superstudio, Madelon Vriesendorp. They have an attitude in the creation of this image that has a similar, let's say, dream in it, in this creating of images. So you are not at all making a representation of the reality, but you rather create a dream image, which then suddenly becomes maybe one day reality.
Perhaps the idea of these perspectives is that in this frame you bring in elements which one after the other become crucial in a way, the way we understand the spatial quality of a project. So also here in this room we made 3 perspectives of a project of Go, it's Pilotis in the forest, and another 3 perspectives of a project of ourselves, a dar in Bahrain. We already had perspectives of our own project, but we decided to make new ones, to kind of seek for, you could say, a parallel between the spatial constellation of these 2 projects. Of course, it did not happen overnight. We first looked at each other's work. We tried to understand what we share and what is different in a way in our work. And we felt in the end that, in a way, in highly different contexts, the Pilotis in the forest is in a way in a very beautiful natural reserve, natural park, where there's only a couple of, say, holiday houses. This very high building on 9-meter high columns creates a room under, in a way, the volume of the house, not unlike, in a way, the room, the space in the measureless of our DAR building, which is, in a way, a very public space, a very small public pocket, a shared pocket, where these traditional music players could interact with the city or with the village. And so I guess, and that's also perhaps the power of these perspectives, it is in making all these parallels that you forget, at least for a moment, like David was saying, you forget for a moment the actual reality, because of course the contexts are fundamentally different. And we also very much believe that that's the power of the architectural type, to a certain extent. That in a way you can make these connections, and you can also, I guess, we also develop the projects that way. So all of a sudden there's this spatial idea, a room stacked on top of a room on top of a room, which can become many different things, many different projects.
Yeah, and just for this exhibition, we actually used the technique of printing these collages on big curtains. We already used it in the Chicago Biennial in a collaboration with Bas Prinsen. And for us, it's also a kind of new way of testing our own images in, let's say, showing architectural collages in a museum context.
So, coming back to this idea of relative abstraction, of course here these curtains are enormous and they play with the spatiality of the sequence of rooms in the CCA. At the same time, we feel their sense of abstraction here very clearly depicted in these almost very rough textures. apart from the two references which David talked about from the collection of the CCA, we thought we'd bring in another tool, which is on the one hand this very delicate drawing of Aldo Rossi, somehow a spatial depiction in relationship to his analogous city, and on the other hand this kind of object drawing of a piece of furniture of Ettore Sozzas from the collection, actually a piece of furniture which belongs to the CCA, but where the moment you look at the drawing itself, you start to forget what it really is. I mean, is it furniture? Is it a totem? Is it a building? And that's been very much, we believe, the power of exactly Sozzas' drawings. That in his, in a way, search for, I mean, new, I would say, objects to mediate our contemporary life, scale starts to play a big role, but scale seems to be the decision at the end of the process. And again, to bring it back to this set, both projects of Go Hasegawa and ourselves are relatively small buildings, but for example, the Dar in Bahrain, it exists in two sizes, you could say. I mean, there's two buildings, quite different, simply because the scale is different. But in a way, the depiction you see here in the back, you could say could almost represent both buildings. So again, it is almost trying to suspend a certain amount of decisions in the architectural process, which we believe is deeply connected with this, as David kind of said, this parallel world. So the perspective as one of these, I would say, pockets of design, like the plan, or as the section, or as the one-to-one materialization. In each of these, you kind of make a set of decisions, which then in the end, you can bring together and becomes the architectural project.
Yeah, and what is also important to say is that in this collaboration with Go Hasegawa and our office, of course, we decided to take on the challenge, let's say, to make a collage of project of Go, and we deliberately wanted to do this. So this exhibition is really about how to work together with an office in Tokyo, and in a way it also asks question about authorship, which is in a way a very important question, but we like to, let's say, blur these boundaries in this room, for instance, because of course the house Pilotis in the forest is built, but how could you in a way appropriate it, in our case, back into a collage? And this is something we then again did for ourselves with the Dar building, because there's existing collages, but as Kersten mentioned, it is also important to again make them specifically for this exhibition.